We are looking at the progression in Kashmir over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And whether we have resolved the problem today, I would start with that and say, no, we have not resolved the problem. We have stabilized Kashmir. To a very great extent, we have stabilized Kashmir through the strategy, the approach which Mr. Modi's government has followed, right? But we are not out of the woods. And that's a cautionary which I always give to everyone, because there's no point me having the experience and then not being transparent and not being upfront in giving that advice. We've got a long way to go still, because Pakistan is still there. The separatists are still there. The terrorist leadership is still there. None of it has disappeared. It's all still there. What we have achieved is we have taken apart all the networks which are an inevitable part of this kind of warfare. We have taken apart the overground warfare networks. We have taken apart the financial networks to a great extent, which supports proxy wars.
Thank you, Jungle Saab. You're very kind to accept the invitation to be part of this documentary. I can't wait to, explore and peel the layers of security and the associated aspects of that with you. Let's start with your background, sir. Both your father and yourself have had an extremely distinguished kind of military service. And both of you come from Garhwal Rifles. What I'm interested to know is obviously the two of you represent two different generations in terms of time, in terms of the political environment, in some terms the adversaries, and so on. So looking at those two paradigms, so to say, how do you assess the difference in military strategy and tactics between your father's time and your time?
Firstly, Jai Hind to all our viewers. It's wonderful to be with you on this program, and you started really on the right note. There is a sentiment attached to this because I'm a second generation soldier, a second generation general officer, so to say, of the Indian Army. Yes, my father and I have lived in completely different times. My father was an officer of the British Indian Army. Of course, one marked aspect of his career was that in 1947, he got the opportunity, he got the option of joining either army, the Indian Army or the Pakistan Army. And he decided to join the Indian Army, which is something which he never regretted, and I don't think our family ever regretted. So we became Indian, and we have been part of the Indian Army. The Indian Army has, well, honored us with 10 decorations to our family between the two of us, which is a rarity by itself. But to come back to the question, yes, we live in different times. His time was a time when, out of independence, the army was not considered very relevant at that time. The leadership of the times had a perception that national security was all about policemen with a couple of lathis and sticks. Things became different after 1962. My father lived through that transition. I lived through that as a child and noticed everything too. It was all infantry based at that time, making any efforts at developments of technology in India as such. Although the Congress government of that time had made a lot of efforts in terms of setting up the DRDO and things like that, nothing really much had been achieved in the early part of the times. It's after 1962, 1965, a sea change took place after 1960. We are aware of what happened to Pakistan, and our approach to warfare with Pakistan changed. We continue to remain very defensive in our approach and attitude. Against the Chinese, we just held off and hoped like hell that nothing would be disturbed on the northern borders. But things started changing from 1989 onwards. By that time, my father had retired. I had joined the army. I was still a middling officer. And we found the changes which were occurring. For one, The army was being increasingly used in counterinsurgency and counterterrorism roles all over India. That was the time when this problem was breaking out all over India. There was a greater political affinity which had come about. The political leadership had a tendency to use the army much more liberally than what it had done before. It also realized that without the armed forces, it was very difficult to actually control the kind of environment, the security environment was existing in India. 2014, when Mr. Modi came to power, things changed quite drastically. And you found that although in 2002, during Mr. Vajpayee's time, India had gone more proactive, we were far more aggressive in our policy, but after 2014, that became even more. And we made sure that our adversaries, such as Pakistan, would not be in a position to make major dents on our security setup. Unfortunately, it is the Chinese with whom we tried to reach out, who, on the other hand, did the reverse in 2020, primarily from an angle that Mr. Modi's India was getting far too confident. And this is what they feared. I'm sure we'll discuss China as we go along. With this is where we are today. It's a competitive world full of technologies. It's not just war fighting. It is not just kinetic weaponry, which is important. It is so important to use the right mix of strategies. Hybrid warfare has come of age today. We find social media. We look at cognitive warfare. All kinds of things which my father's time they could not even have imagined. Kinetic warfare. Today, it's a mix of everything. And as we go along, we'll discuss this.
Sure. Okay. You said your father was in the British Army, and that takes me back to my childhood. I come from Karnataka, and I lived for some time in Markara, the Coorg district in Karnataka, where General Karyappa comes from. I remember during my school days, he would come to give awards to children, and he wouldn't give any award to the children unless they really full-throated Jai Hind kind of slogan they raised. So very fond memories of General Karyappa. We've heard of Manekshaw and so on. And one of the things that people of my generation have always wondered is, compared to Pakistan, where army has meddled with politics, and in fact politics is subservient to army, how come in India we have had the fortunate set of events where there is a separate difference in power lines between military and politics? Has there been any moment in history of India post independence where that line was about to be crossed, or there was a tension of that kind?
Well, first of all, I've been to Markara, your home district, and it's such a beautiful place. Right, I've seen the orange country there completely, and I met the field marshal in his prime in earlier years. Yes, you're absolutely 100% right. Uh, Pakistan somehow, the way the army came into politics was primarily because in my perception, they just didn't have the political talent and the political leadership. In 11 years, by 1958, they had changes of government, no particular, kind of a trend to show that there was something out of the ordinary which was happening in Pakistan. While in India, you found the leadership was there, a good opposition was there, democracy was thriving. In 1958, in Pakistan, Ayub Khan came, overthrew the civilian government, and thereafter, for the better part of the last 60, 70, 65 years, they've had military rule. You see, in India, first of all, we are a diverse country. We are a large country. Our army is a very, very professional army. Not to say that the Pakistan army is not professional. We are a very professional army. And somehow it is the clarity with which the system has existed, by which the political domain has remained on its own, giving quality leadership to the country, irrespective of the party in power. And the manner in which the armed forces have developed themselves, decided that, very, very consciously decided that they will not ever interfere, they will only remain professional in their output. despite the fact we've had opportunities many times, perhaps, the fact that the Indian Army has been used so extensively in counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations, where there is a political element attached to the entire tasking there. Despite all that, there has never been any temptation. In fact, in 1975, if you remember, when emergency was declared, a lot of people thought that the army would probably play a role
Mm,
in this. I think
mm,
General T.N. Raina of that time, much credit to him, absolutely stood back and said, nothing, the army will have nothing to do with this. We remain a totally professional army. That has been missing in Pakistan. If the Pakistan army wants, it can take a step back and make
mm.
sure that it allows the political environment to thrive with whatever mistakes they make. The army is only there to step in case everything is going completely topsy-turvy. But they haven't done that. They have been tempted by power. They have been tempted by all the aspects which are attached to power. And unfortunately, today you've seen the state Pakistan is in 24th time that they are going to the IMF to seek a loan from them. While India is heading to become the fourth largest economy of the world.
Now, in one sense, it's beautiful that there is a separation of power between politics and military. But in another sense, whether it is dealing with external aggression or internal dissension, it is absolutely critical that the political leaders and the military leaders need to dance together. In fact, you are the architect of the Heart Doctrine. Obviously, you know it more than anybody else that political solution is more critical than military solution to any conflict. But that said, how important is the political resolve in guiding the defense forces? The reason I'm asking this question is coming from a common man's perspective. We have heard saying that Kashmir problem remained unresolved for lack of political will, and many times army would catch a militant sacrificing several lives, and the political leaders would release those militants. If you look at it from the common man's perspective, they hear these different versions and say, well, where the tension is coming from. So my question to you, sir, is how important is political leadership in working with and guiding the defense forces?
A very well put together question, I must say, and my immediate response would be: in a country like ours, where we have a liberal democracy, uh, political guidance, political understanding of national security is of immense importance. A lot of people have a misnomer, a mistaken impression that the political community in India does not understand national security. I would disagree with it completely. It's been an evolving process over a period of time. Perhaps in the 50s, this understanding was very less. I can say this with confidence that I have appeared before different parliamentary committees in our country. I've been questioned on many issues. I have been voluntarily included in some of the briefings that we have made to the parliamentary committees. And the kind of questions that were put to me were so searching and so professional that I don't think people of that profession themselves would have actually asked those questions. So I have great respect for the political community of India and irrespective across the party lines. Right. Having said that, I think there have been times, great examples where mistakes have been made, and yet at the same time also great successes have been achieved. The mistakes, for example, in the 50s and the early 60s, was this aspect of understanding the Chinese. Was no doubt a very serious mistake. Not empowering the army, not equipping it sufficiently, etc., and not understanding what the capabilities of the army were and what the capabilities of the People's Liberation Army were at that time. And for example, in 1999, Mr. Vajpayee very, very clearly articulated that while he was launching the army in the counterattacks on in the Kargil area, the LOC would not be crossed. That was the political expediency, the direction which the prime minister at the highest level was giving to the army. A lot of people didn't understand it, and I actually always gave great value to Prime Minister Vajpayee's understanding of the situation. the kind of brownie points India got internationally from it, yet while achieving our military aim. That was the kind of sense with someone like Mr. Vajpayee brought, with all his humanism, his political understanding, a sense of purpose, etc., and of course a sense of patriotism and nationalism. The way Mr. Modi in 2000, after coming to power, decided, for example, to test Pakistan, to test them out with the offers of friendship. And you saw what happened finally in 2015, early 16 with the Pathankot attack. That confirmed very clearly that Pakistan would not respond to Mr. Modi's overtures. And the message meant very clearly, from now on, we will make the efforts differently. And you saw with the removal of Article 370, with the responses that we made through surgical strikes, through the Balakot strike, etc., the messaging became very clear. I think the political messaging in all this was absolutely outstanding. It helped the army hugely to control the situation in Jammu and not lose out. The last part of this, I've always, you mentioned the Hearts Doctrine. I always consider that this is a all of government, all departments, all of society approach which has to be used in a situation such as Jammu and Kashmir. I think no one has understood it better than Mr. Modi and his government. Now, by putting Mr. Manoj Sinha there and his outreach to the people, gingering up all departments to do what only the army was doing earlier, that has made all the difference. So, politico-military understanding, politico-military strategizing and coordinating together is an evolving thing. It has happened over a time. We've learned our lessons. We are still making mistakes. We will overcome those mistakes in the future.
You gave several examples, such as Kargil. I would like to go back to another example, if we can, which is India participating in the 71 war that resulted in the creation of Bangladesh. Even Mr. Vajpayee at that time hailed Mrs. Indira Gandhi as the Bharat Mata. That there was such a reverence in the whole of the country for Mrs. Indira Gandhi's decision at the time. So India participating in that war, how much of it was political and how much of it that was military?
Well, if I can recall, and I'm sure you would also remember this, the famous episode in which after 23rd of March, when the Bangabandhu declared independence, Field Marshal Manekshaw, then Manekshaw, was called up by the Cabinet Committee for Security and told to be ready to get into Bangladesh at the earliest. And how Sam Manekshaw then advised each and every member of the Cabinet Committee for Security to prepare, and that all his recommendations which he had made earlier had not been accepted, and therefore that he would take time to prepare to ensure a guaranteed victory. To that extent, it was a military tweaking, or you can say the military inputs which were given very adequately, and it's to the majority of the political leadership that they accepted. But the decision to go to war at all, in a time when the Cold War was on, America was not India's friend. The fact that we went in to sign the 20-year Indo-Soviet treaty, all these were in the political domain, political diplomatic domain to a great extent. And therefore, I would say that the 1971 victory was an ideal combination of the political, the diplomatic, and the military put together. Each played its role, and at different times, each played the dominant role, right? Very correctly, very appropriately, and ensured that final victory was delivered for it.
Okay. So let's shift gear now and talk about war tactics. Now, for common man, we sit in the comfort of our lounge and, watch a movie on Bollywood or Hollywood about war, and it's pretty exciting. But for people like you, who is on the ground fighting the war, putting your life at risk, is a totally different scenario altogether. The other day, when I was looking at the TV shots of the Iron Dome in Israel, rescuing 95% of the missiles and rockets that were launched at Israel, it reminded me of the TV serials on Mahabharata. Each warring faction would launch one on another, and we would laugh at it, saying, Well, how primitive would that be? But now, when you see it, well, it's actually happening. Somebody launches and then some other dome protects it, and so on. So my point is, when it comes to the art of modern warfare, and if you were to pinpoint certain paradigms in 2-3 periods or whatever, how would you
You see, it's all about, as I said, it's all about progression. It's all about progression of human aspects, human values, politics, and a lot to do with technologies. Uh, Wars before the 80s were primarily in the conventional domain. And I think the best examples of it are 1965 between India and Pakistan, 1967 the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Sinai conflict, if you remember, 1973 the Yom Kippur War. It was national resources, the armed forces put together and all their implements against the forces of the other country, and it depended on what was the outcome and who was the best. These were generally short in nature, 10 days, 14 days, 20 days, and the outcome was
Mhm,
very clear: victory or defeat, as you saw in
mhm,
71, as you saw in 67, as you saw in 73.
mhm,
Somewhere down the line, these things changed after 1980, particularly
mhm,
the time when the Russians came into Afghanistan. And that was the nascent period where hybrid wars started coming into being. Conventional weapons, kinetic weapons were used. At the same time, it was important. You found the lines got blurred. There was no rear, there was no flank, there was no front. Everywhere the adversary could be, right? There were no demarcated lines, and on top of that, the rules of war started changing, right? Otherwise, there were very clear-cut rules of war earlier. In fact, even the earlier times, there used to be rules of war to say no fighting at night. People actually withdrew after 6 o'clock, relaxed, and came back to fight the next morning. But all that, of course, has changed. Uh, Hybrid war, particularly after 9/11, when the Americans went into Afghanistan, and prior to that, the Gulf War One and Gulf War Two changed things a lot. Lots and lots of new technologies started coming in. Information warfare started becoming very, very important. Space-based warfare, the taking down of satellites of other countries and things like that. This became very important. Uh, Something like Jammu and Kashmir, which has gone on for the better part of 35 years. Uh, Hybridity, which included the violent aspect of terrorism, but at the same time included ideological aspects to change the minds of the population, right? To bring in a financial conduits, drugs, drug cartels. All this has become a part of warfare today. Fortunately, we are also seeing that in 2000, a return to some form of conventional war. What we are seeing in the Ukraine has been very, very conventional in nature, with no victories outlined for anyone. The Hamas capable, the Israel Hamas war, which was launched on 7th of October, you've seen there, we expected Israel to be to actually simply go and bludgeon Hamas, but it's not happened. And a country like Iran, through proxies, has played this game with the entire Western world and Israel through in the area of Syria and northern Iraq, in Gaza, in South Yemen, places like that, only through its proxies. And now we are seeing the last of them. The latest thing, just exchange of missiles when countries don't have common borders with each other and they cannot launch infantry against each other. So now they are just throwing a lot of explosive at each other and at the same time keeping their protection capabilities high up. So this is how warfare has changed over a period of time, and it's going to continue changing in this manner. The internet has changed things drastically. The information world, after all, if you remember, ISIS in 2014, when it came and suddenly jumped into importance, how ISIS controlled the minds of so many young people in the West. 40,000 well to do people from the Western world entered into northern Iraq to fight on behalf of ISIS against their own countries and against their own organizations. So, this is the changing nature of war. You cannot put your finger to it and say, this is it. It's going to remain like this. No. Every day brings a change in warfare.
Sure, sure. Okay. Now, from a common man's perspective, I think you beautifully explained the nature of the hybrid war and the challenges it brings in terms of arming a country. Now, again, from a common man's perspective, it poses, it confounds the common man even more. Uh, and the reason I'm saying that is because if you look at the big wars in the last 50 years or so, America Vietnam War. Okay, everybody knew from a technological point of view who was the overwhelming military power. America couldn't win Vietnam War. They couldn't win the Korean War. They couldn't really overwhelm in the enemies in Afghanistan or Iraq. Similarly, Russia hasn't been able to browbeat Ukraine and so on. And we've also seen these cheap LEDs in Afghanistan, Iraq wars, and now these cheap drones. Iran made cheap drones, unmanned drones, going and causing immense havoc. Now, when you see all that, you really wonder how strategically important and smart it is to invest in sophisticated arms, because when it comes to the ground, even cheap as chips inventions can overwhelm a massively powered army.
Yes, there's no doubt about it that today developing technologies, etc., always tend to sort of get the better of existing technologies of that time. But I would qualify it by saying this happens for a temporary period of time. For example, a lot of people told me at the outset of the Ukraine war, a lot of people wrote on this to say that the tank is now obsolete because you have got the UAV, you got the drone, and the drone can be, sort of
Yeah,
thrown up, a big drone or a small drone, and a drone
yeah.
can attack from the top, and the top is the most vulnerable part of a tank. But I can tell you something, there are some technologies which remain basic and core to warfare. For example,
Hmm.
the infantry, the man. The man is the most important. The human being behind the weapon is the most important. Protect him in different ways, the way you can, right? Give him communications, give him, visibility through haze and smoke and things like that. Give him protection, give him the capability to fire up to 1,000 meters. And you find the capability of an infantry soldier keeps enhancing from time to time. No one ever says that an infantry soldier has become completely obsolete, right? Similarly, the tank. From 1916 at the Battle of the Somme in the First World War, when the tank appeared for the first time, till now there have been drastic changes in the tank, in the manner in which it is conceived and its role. I still say there have been times when the tank's role has receded, diluted, but come back all over again. Now, for example, in Gaza, the Israeli army cannot make progress in the built up areas without tanks. Otherwise, they'll suffer innumerable infantry casualties. This all behind the tank that everything happens. The tanks also suffer because everything is at very short ranges, right? Uh, Similarly, what has happened is now you are seeing with the new technologies between Iran and Israel. Iran's technologies are low end, Israel's are high end, but yet that asymmetry is not leading to a situation in which Israel can claim victory,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
300 missiles thrown. We don't know what kind of missiles these were yet completely. These were perhaps low end missiles. What we know of Iran is that from 1992, I've been monitoring since 1992, Iran has got a huge set of missiles from North Korea, from Russia, from China. What they have revealed in this 300 is just the beginning, just the first part. They started with slow moving drones to give an indicator to Israel that something was coming to message. So, many times these things are very situational. I don't tend to go overboard to sort of deduce that something has happened, and because of that, a technology or a capability or a strategy has become completely obsolete. No, that's not true. I'm sure we'll
Mhm.
find lots and lots of ways of bouncing back from the
Mhm.
stalemate which has occurred in Ukraine. Already
Mhm.
enough think tanks around the world are studying this. I'm sure everyone is looking at the Hamas war at the moment. Close quarter battle, right? How come 25, 30,000 Hamas fighters have been able to hold back 3,30,000, 3,50,000 Israeli well armed, well trained soldiers back? These are military lessons which will emerge. And this is a cat and mouse game. Lose some, win some, and keep developing as you go along.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fascinating wartime discussion that is taking place because while Israel showed its military might through the Iron Dome in the last few days, but if you go back to October 7th, when Hamas attacked, it looked completely powerless
Completely
and
powerless.
helpless, and incurred the kind of loss that nobody had thought that
They had the
Israel would.
capability of the finest intelligence in the world, the manner in which they had put their intelligence. But somehow and everyone surmised after 7th of October that it was hubris, which led to this kind of a thing. And the fact that Israel was perhaps relying far too much on electronic intelligence, technical intelligence, and not sufficient enough on human intelligence.
That beautifully takes me to my next point, which is the man versus machine debate. And you very rightly said that there is no substitute for human intelligence, as we saw when the U.S. entered Afghanistan. They couldn't get that human intelligence, and they tried to use these unmanned vehicles to get that kind of intelligence, which really did not succeed. The only point of departure as of now is, and these things are changing all the time, just in the last 2 years, the generative AI, the kind of buzz that it has created in business and commerce and elsewhere, a lot of projections are being made. Now, I wonder, when it comes to the defense forces, getting somebody to put their lives on the line to defend the country is the biggest challenge any organization of any kind can
Absolutely.
face. So, do you think generative AI would be able to kind of address that issue? That an AI driven robot can substitute men on the ground and do the job?
See, Mohan Saab, I have experienced this in many situations where I have been down and my head has been down, and I've been passing instructions to my soldiers, trying to keep their heads down to make sure that the bullets flying over the overhead does not affect anyone under battle conditions. It's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. And the greatest thing that has to happen under those such conditions is that you got to think. You got to outmaneuver your adversary.
Mhm.
I don't think generative artificial intelligence yet has reached that stage, or in the very near future, that every single situation can be thought about. The human mind can adapt itself to any situation under the sun and take decisions immediately. Here, decisions may sometimes have to be reflected back. The inputs have to be reflected back yet to take human decisions, right? So, while artificial intelligence, no doubt, is an enabler and will continue to remain an enabler, it's revolutionizing warfare, no doubt. The power of the human being. You saw it, and you quoted some very good examples from Vietnam. You quoted examples from Afghanistan. I can tell you the manner in which the U.S. Armed Forces, they brought in 140,000 troops at the highest level when of the size of Afghanistan, 140,000. The Indian Army brought in almost 200,000 troops to manage Jammu and Kashmir at that time, at its prime. And because we had the troops on the ground, we had the interaction with the population, we carried out a lot of what is called hearts and minds, uh, winning of hearts and minds campaigns. It's because of that we succeeded, and it took us 30 years succeeding. The United States stayed 21 years in Afghanistan. At the end of it, they had 10,000 troops left on ground, and they hoped like hell to be able to build up the Afghan National Army and hand over operations to them. It was wishful thinking, absolutely wishful thinking. You needed quality soldiers, you needed thinking soldiers, you needed well trained soldiers, and you needed a lot of technologies. At the same time, you needed a human understanding of what the ground situation was. I still continue to say if you are going on an expeditionary campaign into Afghanistan without understanding the Afghan culture, you cannot even hope to make an impact. This is something we learned in Jammu and Kashmir, that our troops on the ground have to have local knowledge, understanding of the local cultures. Unless you have that, you cannot win these wars. You can bring in any amount of artificial intelligence, bring in any amount of munitions. At the end of the day, until the heart is finally won, you're not going to win this war.
Okay. Now, that again brings me beautifully from war tactics to war theaters. And as far as India is concerned, Kashmir has been, a war theater for a long time, and has simmered, for so long, resulting in the deaths of, hundreds and thousands of Indian soldiers. And the rest of India has simply stood back and helplessly looked at what was happening in Kashmir. And we thought that in our lifetime, this issue will not be resolved, that this simmering war will continue to grow. And you are the best person to kind of enlighten us on how the situation panned out in Kashmir. For a long time, we couldn't win the hearts and minds of people, constant stone throwing and so on. But now, with the abrogation of Article 3, which was seen as either a massive victory or a massive disaster, but now we see, at least on the surface, that peace has returned and prosperity is returning as well to Kashmir. So, in the light of your experience, could you please enlighten us what's happened in the Kashmir in the last 10, 15 years?
To put your question into the right context here, we are looking at the progression in Kashmir over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and whether we have resolved the problem today. I would start with that and say, no, we have not resolved the problem. We have stabilized Kashmir. To a very great extent, we have stabilized Kashmir through the strategy, the approach which Mr. Modi's government has followed, right? But we are not out of the woods. And that's a cautionary which I always give to everyone, because there's no point me having the experience and then not being transparent and not being upfront in giving that advice. We've got a long way to go still, because Pakistan is still there, the separatists are still there, the terrorist leadership is still there. None of it has disappeared. It's all still there. What we have achieved is we have taken apart all the networks which are an inevitable part of this kind of warfare. We have taken apart the overground warfare networks. We have taken apart the financial networks to a great extent, which supports proxy war. This war in Kashmir has been a proxy war, just like the war in Yemen or the war against Israel on the Lebanese front, etc., are also proxy wars. Proxy wars run on networks. Someone has to sponsor and someone has to ensure that that pipeline is always, sort of full and being pushed. We have managed to cut those pipelines to a great extent. For example, infiltration, we have cut it to a huge extent. Right? Recruitment within Kashmir, we have cut it to a great extent. What we have not been able to cut, perhaps to a great extent, is the ideological linkages. Now, the problem in Kashmir, to the credit of Pakistan, I give them the credit for it, that they correctly identified that one of the ways to really bring India to its feet was to bring an ideological change in Kashmir. From its typical centrist Sufi thinking to a very radicalized form of Islam, which would have greater linkages with Pakistan and the rest of the Islamic world. We have succeeded against it to some extent, but not entirely. We have to work much more on it to have a greater cultural understanding. The government of India, of course, is trying its best at different levels, and in due course, I'm sure our success will come our way. Pakistan's intent is still there. They have invested so many years in it and so much of money in it. The reputation of the Pakistan army is at stake. Not only that, but the importance of Pakistani army. The Pakistan Army's importance within Pakistan is largely dependent on driving the Kashmir narrative in Pakistan itself. So all this has to be neutralized only through maybe cognitive means more than anything else. And that is something we have not been very strong at. Now, to again, to take the situation back very, very briefly, this was all happening over a period of time. To the credit of the commanders, the uh, political leadership of the yesteryears, we used tremendous amount of kinetics, which was required. We couldn't have done without. The strength of terrorists was just too much. And the structures which had been established were such, and India did not lose its democratic approach. In 7 years, in 1996, we had elections in Kashmir. And thereafter, there has been an elected government in Kashmir right through. The mismatch was that with a different kind of a government in Kashmir and a different kind of a government in the center, the convergence was somehow missing. And we allowed the democratic process a little too much of leeway to try and resolve this problem in the earlier years. Thereafter, once all this was realized, I think our tweaking, our change of strategies made a huge difference. And 2019 was a very bold decision. We could have continued with that situation for the next 10 years and said we will take our decisions when the time comes. No, we took that decision on 5th of August very correctly and with a lot of preparatory work behind it. And that has led to the current success where you're finding suddenly the narratives are changing. It's now a development narrative, it's an economic narrative, it's an education narrative, it's a youth-based narrative, a women's narrative. All this is working very positively, converging together. We have to just keep energizing this. And I hope that the Lok Sabha elections, the first indicators will be there of how well democracy works in Kashmir. Thereafter, by September, as the Supreme Court has given out, I'm sure the assembly elections will take place, and then we will have to take our decisions as to how to take this forward.
Now, I will, in terms of war theater, I'll come to the Himalayan borders of Siachen Glacier and Ladakh and so on when we start talking about China and Pakistan. But let me just focus on another so-called internal insurgency, which is the northeastern states. Yesterday, I read that nobody voted in the Nagaland Lok Sabha elections. We all know about the fires in Manipur, and the critics allege that the government has not taken any action on Manipur. But at the same time, we also know that a lot of infrastructure development is going on in the northeastern, particularly Arunachal Pradesh and so on. So how do you see this entire theater of northeastern states from India's security perspective?
I would sum it up as saying it's just work in progress. And outcomes, we cannot judge by the outcomes which are evident to us at the moment. The outcomes will come our way subsequently. There's a lot of work which has gone on to this. Starting with Arunachal, for example, the infrastructure in those areas has really developed, and development has reached the people. The armed forces capability of reaching up to the line of actual control is far, far better today than what it ever was. There are many more helipads, there are more tunnels, all that is there, airfields, etc. Everything has come about in a much more revolutionized way. Yet, when you come further south, and I can show you the same thing for Nagaland, maybe for Mizoram, everywhere, development. I've visited all these areas recently. Development is evident. But obviously, there is a political mismatch. Different aspirations of different ethnicities, subgroups, etc. It's very difficult to match the aspirations with achievements. You may achieve something for a group, it will be at the cost of some other. That's happened in Nagaland and Manipur, between Nagaland and Manipur to a very great extent. This aspect yesterday of some people having boycotted the elections, very, very major portion of the Nagaland constituencies have actually boycotted. Well, these things are expected in democracies, these things do happen. We had in Kashmir a time, the first election, we had, I think, a 3 or 4% turnout in Sopore, a 2% turnout in Srinagar. Yet we went ahead and said, doesn't matter. Yeah, as long as even one man comes and votes, democracy has been restored. And we will build up confidence on this. Obviously, therefore, this is something that we'll have to work on. I'm sure the Election Commission will take stock of it. We've got a very strong Election Commission which will take stock of it, which will discuss with the government. There could always be an occasion to have a repoll there in those areas to provide more security for those people who wish to come. I'm told that there
Mhm.
were a lot of people who wanted to actually vote but could not because perhaps they felt a little insecure. You can have more presence of the police and the CAPF elements, etc. So all this Manipur is a problem. There's no doubt Manipur is a problem. There's a transnational thing attached to it with the Myanmar border and across the Myanmar into the Myanmar territory, etc. There is a cross flow of ethnicity across the borders of different states. There are people from Manipur who are in Mizoram. There are people from Nagaland who are in. It's not possible for a government at the center to satisfy every single element which is involved in this. And so there will always be some kind. And I think in India, with the diversity that we have, this is something the central government always realizes. That is not possible to satisfy 100% of the people in 100% of the time. So
Correct.
that's what politics is all about. And whatever we achieve, at least we have ensured that choice is there for the people to vote, to make to give political strength to their representatives, etc. And I think as we go along, more development takes place. Development in the Northeast taking place at a fairly hectic rate. I'm sure these things will start receding more and more.
Okay. All right. Now, India has been the biggest importer of arms and ammunition in the world today, and apart from our historical reliance on Russia and now newfound cooperation with the West, and so on, we are not only procuring latest technologies such as Rafale from France, but we're also focusing on Make in India, Atmanirbharta kind of policy, which is making pretty good progress. In that context, obviously, we don't have time to go into all of those issues, but I just want to pick your brain, sir, on India-Israel relationship. I was interviewing one of the Israeli academics for this documentary, and she made a very interesting point that for a long time, India-Israel relationship was that of a person having a mistress who did not want to disclose that relationship with anybody in the world. But with Mr. Modi's visit to Israel in 20, it was basically proven as to how close India's relationship with Israel, and one can only imagine, in terms of border maintenance, how Israel, technology and Israeli tactics can be very useful for India. So, how do you see, India-Israel relationship in the context of defense collaboration and technologies?
See, first of all, let's look at first the whole aspect of Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. We discussed earlier the concept of modern warfare, and we realized that no longer are we in the era of 14-day, 20-day wars. Conventional wars could extend to 6 months, 8 months, a year or more. So a nation which is restricting itself to import of weapons and technology and ammunition will obviously find itself hugely handicapped. I think India has realized that well enough in time. Secondly, I think the realization also came about sometime in early part of this government's tenure, where the import bill of India was something the modernization bill of the Indian Armed Forces was some that we were looking at was something around 150,000 to 200,000 crores. This is about 10 years ago. Probably multiplied much more. And everyone realized, why are we paying this money to foreign firms? What is there is so there are technologies within India, there are startups within India. We are exporting human resources, manpower around the world. It is our manpower which is going and developing things in those countries. Why can't we do it ourselves? The start point was there. Then the liberalization of partnerships, FDI, and things like that, all that started coming into a little more confidence building with the DRDO. The DRDO seemed to be, the armed forces seem to have lost confidence in the DRDO at that time. And
Mhm.
these partnerships, therefore, are taking India to the next level. But in the middle of this, 1992, we decided to go to Israel. Prior to 1992, it was a different world in the Cold War. Our relationship, we were a non-aligned nation, so to say. Even we are non-aligned even today. But our relationship with Israel, or anyone's relationship with Israel in those days, was always seen in black and white. If you remember, South Africa and Israel were the two countries stamped on the Indian passport to say if you have visited these countries, you are not supposed to visit any other country. No one would admit you anywhere,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Or your passport said this passport is not for Israel and not for South Africa. That was the
Mm.
time.
Mm.
Then slowly the relationship started building up, and we realized the commonality of the problems. We were facing the problem of Kashmir, of Pakistan. Israel was facing the problem of Palestine, was facing the problem of the Arab world. Though there's no comparison between Kashmir and Palestine. Completely. I mean, a lot of people draw me into those discussions to talk about Kashmir and Palestine. There's no similarity between them. The fact is that we had adversaries of a similar nature. Adversaries were our great friends. We had a very good outreach into the Arab world. We got half our energy from there, more than half our energy from there. Today we have got a diaspora of almost 9 million people in these areas. We are getting remittances from here of about 45 to 48 billion dollars every year. So our interests are equally with the Arabs as much as they are with Israel. Its technologies and its research work. So this was one of the major reasons why India did not want to publicize, throw to the winds its relationship with Israel because it was a sensitive issue. We both
Mhm.
realized that we are great friends of each other. We can do a tremendous amount for each other, but it's best to keep this relation under. And I think that was the sensible thing of that time. Today, India is showing a balanced face everywhere. You see, in the Ukraine conflict, the world has respected our neutrality, the manner in which Mr. Jaishankar has handled it. You are seeing that in the case of the Hamas war, even in the case of the Iran Israel ongoing conflict, India is not taking sides. India is holding back, and we are giving advice. We're speaking to both sides to curtail it, stop it. That's the way a mature nation, emerging middle power has to look at its interests. So I foresee much more of this as we go on to become the fourth largest economy, as we rise from the middle power status to a big power status in the next couple of years, etc. I think the best example is what Mr. Modi spoke to President Putin at the SEO summit in Tashkent in 2022 when he said this
Yeah.
is not the season for war. And how that statement, a single line statement from our Prime Minister, went absolutely, you know, all over the world.
Right.
Everyone appreciated it at that time. Right? So I think that's how the relationship between India and Israel has been and is going to continue.
Okay. All right. Now, since I teach human resource management, I can't help myself but ask certain questions from the HR angle. You very rightly highlighted that in the man versus machine debate, no matter how much technology develops, it's the human aspect that will always be crucial in warfare or in guarding the borders of any country. Now, my question is, when we look at the multi-generational workforce today, even from the corporate perspective, we say that the younger generation is not as passionate. There is no fire in the belly. I worked in the IT sector. I've seen in the 80s and 90s the kind of effort that India put in to make its mark in the IT services. But when you see the current generation of IT workforce, one would think, well, they're not as passionate, they're not as committed, and so on. So when we look at this multi-generational workforce, do you see that kind of a difference in the armed forces personnel, sir?
That's a very interesting perspective to look at. Generations will always differ. The chemistry of demonstration of generations differs. I have had the good fortune of commanding a part of the Army War College in India, where it's called the Junior Command Wing, where officers, 425 officers in 4 batches, go through in one year. That's almost 1,700 officers in a single year go through the just junior command wing, being trained in different aspects of warfare. And that's where you really get a insight into the manner in which the transition of generations is taking. I found that this generation was far better than my generation. Number one, my generation was rustic, strong, physically very fit. Our access to technology was very limited. Our approach to warfare from the army side, the approach to warfare was not cognitive at all. Our thing was more kinetic and physical. This generation which is coming, first of all, a lot of people from the olden times say they don't read. I disagree. They read a hell of a lot. They read a hell of a lot. They read a mixture of things, right? I would only advise they should read more of history. Much more of history, particularly military history, is something that they must read much more. But technologically, they are so proficient. I started experimenting with them while I was the commander of the junior command wing. I set up a network, local internet network among all within the wing, in the accommodation, the residential accommodation of the officers. And I said, exchange your thoughts in the evening, put in your blogging, do blogging in the evening. And I found this really catching on. And lots of ideas started coming to me. I started picking up those ideas in the morning and going and discussing with them. I found instead of me educating them, they were educating me at all times. I found myself hugely empowered. I can tell you, Monsab, I went to Kashmir almost from this place. I went for a short while, 6 months to Bhopal, and I went to Kashmir. The learning with which I went was huge because these are the people who I gave them the freedom and the liberty to speak to me as much as they want, to generate thinking, innovation, etc. We had lots and lots of different instruments by which we could do it, right? I was hugely enthused. A lot of people told me, "Oh, how is it that you are so close to this younger generation and you are understanding them so well?" Why? What happened was that, this particular course is a very difficult course, the junior command course. And a lot of people try and cancel the course when they're nominated. Let's say, I'll come 2 years later, I'll come 3 years later. But in my time there, I got a feedback saying a lot of people said, no, let's go and do the course. Let's go and do it, because that I was giving them the chance and the liberty to speak up. And this is what this generation wants. They want the power to speak. They don't like to keep it inside them. They like to speak it all out. They are very good, they are full of empathy with their colleagues, with their jawans, with their troops. They are very experienced in ground operations. Most of them, my generation, did not all. I was one of the fortunate ones who got a chance to serve all over the country in different turbulent conditions. But there are a lot of people who didn't do that. Today, every officer is getting that kind of a chance to do it. So the development is much faster and much higher. Secondly, the kind of exposure they're getting internationally. They are going to the United Nations. They're going a plethora of courses all over the world. India is cooperating with at least 20 countries in terms of joint exercises. Yesterday only, there was a joint exercise in Uzbekistan where the army chief was present there. So these officers are getting a chance to interact with different other armies around the world. As a result, if someone tells me, sir, how do you compare yourself with the people of the present today? I'd say they are far, far better than what I ever was.
That's a very positive note, and even in the corporate sector, you see that today's workers are knowledge workers. They're not just bringing in their hands; they are bringing in their brain. Yes. Now, in a business context, that makes tremendous sense. That one is risk taking, one is innovative, one wants to think outside the box, and so on. But I've always wondered, in the context of the defense forces, right, you wouldn't want a person who would defy orders and who would do out of the box thinking. Like, in a warfare, you want people to obey your orders rather than saying, no, I want to go in another direction because I think, this is wrong. So coming from command and control kind of management mindset that we have had for so long, how does that working in the defense sector?
See, Mohan Saab, you have to temper yourself as a leader. I may be old world in my thinking and say that my word is the last word. When I have given this direction, no one will come back, no one will debate, no one will question. Right? That's old world thinking completely. Even in the old world, the armed forces were very clear. Everyone could give an opinion, and till the time the discussion was on, once the discussion ended and the
Mhm.
superior, the person responsible, has given his decision, then there were no comebacks. And it was very clear. The the um, the senior commander would always make it clear: success is because of you, the subordinates. Failure will be because of me, the superior. This is hugely empowering. If you have this kind of an attitude, it's hugely empowering for your command. That's something I followed always. I always told my men, don't worry about failure. Failure is because of me, my directions, and my poor generalship and capability. Success is because of your energy and your capability. And that empowered a lot of people. That's the principle with which the armed forces normally function, right? There will be aberrations here and there. You will find an odd commander. The army's selection system is very good. I have been the military secretary of the army, which has done all the selections for promotions, for posting us abroad, and things like that. So I understand this. We have a very fine system for this, in which there's a tremendous competition which is on at all times, right? But we always look at how to take out the best. No,
Mhm.
those best, you have to exploit the best of the best. And that exploitation can only be done by empowering them. And if you do not empower them and you keep only subjugating them to your will, you will never get success. So that I think is a very, very individual thing. Leadership is not taught in the army. No one, gives you an odd lecture here and there, but otherwise, structured leadership courses are very rare in the armed forces. They do have an odd seminar or something like that at times to exchange best practices and that kind of a thing. But by and large, structured education is lacking. It should, I, for one, would always like to see more structured education on leadership, because today the kind of research which is going on in leadership, on human resource management, etc., I don't think that has come or has not been made available to the armed forces completely.
Mhm. Now, elsewhere in the world, defense forces have had a real problem in attracting talent because it's not really seen in the current contemporary context as a attractive career as it used to be once upon a time. Even in India, South Indians wouldn't really look at army career as a coveted career as the North Indians would, right? So, from the point of view of attraction of talent, how do you see the current situation? Is it bad, or is it pretty good? A lot of talented young people are coming forward to join the defense forces.
We have a deficiency in the armed forces in terms of officers. The army, for example, has a huge deficiency of almost about 10 to 11,000 officers. And one of the reasons for it is we have never compromised on our standards. At the services selection board level, where after the writing of the UPSC exam, you'll find a person coming up for interviews and group testing, psychological tests, etc. We could have compromised with our standards and brought in 10,000 people over a period of time, typical model of intake. But we have sort of denied ourselves that because we said we will not compromise. And today we are still functioning on a fairly large deficiency. But I think a time will come when the army will have to do. But despite that, the people that we are taking in at the moment, I'm not dissatisfied with them in any way. I think we are getting a good stock of people. There was a time when you had a very educated people coming into the army, people from public school backgrounds and things like that. And today suddenly there's a change. You'll find generationally, you will find that two people from a slightly lower economic strata are now making it to the officer cadre, because those who were from well-to-do, better educated backgrounds, etc., are diverting themselves into other fields, particularly the corporate field or scientific and the technological field, in the administrative field, and things like that. But this has been an ongoing game in India for the better part of the last 30, 40 years. Nothing has changed. The army has done badly in terms of our achievements. The same officers over a period of time have led our troops and led them with great professionalism in all the situations. You go to Ladakh, you go to Siachen Glacier, and you see the kind of volunteerism. When you take a unit to Siachen, you need more officers. So you send out a call and say, anyone who's a volunteer can come and join. So people come from my own regiment, people came, I remember, and people from other regiments also volunteer. We also want to have a taste of what the dangers and the threats of Siachen are. You see, one of the things on which an officer thrives in the army is self-esteem. Very, very important aspect. The moment you're putting on a Siachen medal, the moment you're putting on a Sena medal here, or a wound medal here, or something, people stop you in the corridors and say, "Oh, my friend, where did you get this? Where did you get this? Oh, wonderful! You've been in Siachen. You've served there. Which post were you on?" This is what is empowering. I volunteered. I remember I was sitting in a plush appointment in Jaipur when my unit was moving to Sri Lanka. I said, I'll be damned. If my unit is moving to Sri Lanka, I will not be caught sitting in the air-conditioned corridors of Jaipur. I'll be with my men there in the jungles. Because I have to command those men tomorrow. I have to get the work done by them. And if they feel that I was not up to it and I was not with them and when danger was calling, then there's no point.
Very nice. Okay. All right. Now let's come to China, the elephant in the room, because that has posed the biggest challenge to India in recent years in terms of securing our borders. Now, my question to you is not from a political aspect, because we know that the Modi government has tried its best to, establish relationship with them, as did Nehru during, his Panchsheel agreement and so on, and that's really not worked. I've got two questions. One is, many analysts in this documentary have said that it is very, very important to understand the mindset of China towards India. That there cannot be, two suns under the sun. There cannot be two tigers on the mountain. And China has always seen that that's going to be the ruler as far as this part of the world is concerned. And therefore, it will always deal with India in that kind of aggression. So, how do you dissect the Chinese mindset?
Coming to China, China is always a thing by itself to look at. Maybe one day we can have a whole program on China. But China and India, two giants of Asia. You see, China is, first of all, completely Pacific oriented. India is completely oriented towards the Indian Ocean. So geographically, while we are conjoined on the Himalayas, we have totally different avenues, different sides. The Chinese, civilizationally, as rich as India, both are civilizationally tigers and lions of the world. It's obvious that that kind of a competition comes in. But the competition should only come if there are perceptions of threat. Otherwise, both sides can work together to ensure that both the people ultimately benefit from our cooperation. That cooperation, that element of trust is missing. And is more on the part of China, I'll say, because obviously as an Indian, I feel that. More on the part of China. China has never been able to decide, is it a friend of India? Is it an adversary of India? Is it a collaborator of India? Is it a partner of India? They've never been. They've treated the relationship differently at different times.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel highly suspicious when they send a message of negativism to India and India feels perturbed with the kind of threats which are emerging from there, looks to strengthen itself, not only militarily, but also geopolitically, by reaching out to the Quad, having a strong relationship with the United States, etc., then China feels extremely perturbed. Now, one of the things which I've always said is that maybe over the years we could have overcome this problem. But after 1978 in particular, after the four modernizations of Deng Xiaoping came about, China perceived that if there was any threat from India, it was primarily from the maritime domain. Because that is the area through which China's entire trade passes. Its energy corridor goes south of India through the Straits of Malacca and reaches the eastern seaboard, where all the manufacturing has taken place. China's 14% growth at one stage, average 10% growth, has been achieved because of that manufacturing. The manufactured and completed goods are put into containers and brought by shipping through the Straits of Malacca to the markets in India. What a huge market in India. The markets in Africa, the markets in the Middle East, in West Asia, and on through the Suez to Europe. That is how China has thrived. But it feels that this maritime route from the Straits of Malacca to the Suez Canal is India's domain. It's an area where India can choose to intervene, interfere, if it is not friendly with China, if it is in cahoots, with cooperation with the United States and other countries, maybe it can actually even put obstacles to the flow of all this. The Chinese made one major mistake in 1978. They did not give priority to the construction or the modernization of their navy. They gave highest priority to the modernization of their army. And the navy is far behind times, which is why you find that they are still concerned about the possibility of India, US, Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Indonesia getting together and paralyzing the Indian Ocean. It's because of this that China wants to keep India and its focus, its gaze on the Himalayas. They always want to do that. They must keep doing something in the Himalayan area to make sure that India does not develop its maritime capability optimally. And it is forced to develop its continental capability up in the Himalayas. If we are concerned about land, and which is an obsession with us always, we are concerned about land. The moment an incident takes place, we think of doubling the army in those areas, putting up many more troops, etc., like has happened in Ladakh. And it works in favor of China to a great extent. I'm a strong believer that we have to do this. We have to protect ourselves in the Himalayas because we can't take chances with that territory. We have to strengthen the land forces at the cost of our navy from time to time. And although China is not going to go to war with us, no, there is no guarantee of the winnability of war if China decides to go to war with India. And even if there's a stalemate on the Himalayan front, I tell you, the world will take India as the victor and not China. China doesn't even have the experience. After 1979, they haven't fought a war anywhere. The troops are not experienced. What you're seeing is only on video screens, tremendous projection of the fighting which takes place in Tibet or in other parts of China, etc. It's all projection. China is using information warfare to fight its wars. Cognitive warfare. There are three warfare strategy of 2003: legal warfare, media warfare, cyber warfare. Right? So these are the things which are now, unfortunately, because of that, this little tiff takes place, standoffs take place in the Ladakh from time to time. And one of the important things we have to remember is till today, in 21 or 22 meetings that we have had since 19 about the line of actual control, China has not acceded to our demand that they provide us with one marked map of their perception of the line of actual control. They are not giving us. Why? Because they want this problem to persist forever until they feel the asymmetry between India and China will be so high that India cannot at all ever interfere in the maritime zone. But I don't think that time will come. India is well on the march of development, and hopefully the asymmetry between our economies will be overcome in the next 20 or 25 years.
That's a very interesting perspective. I have got one last question on China. Now, when we compare the strengths and weaknesses of the Chinese and the Indian defense forces, obviously, when it comes to technological superiority, Chinese are far ahead of us. There is no doubt about that. But we have just had this discussion on man versus machine, where we basically came to the conclusion that it is the human mind that is the deciding factor when it comes to winning the war, so to say. And that's been our experience, from Vietnam onwards. Now, when we focus on the human resource aspect of the Indian army and the Chinese army, there is one argument that because of the one child policy in China, the generation that has grown up is very soft and they are not battle hardened. The last time they had the battle was something like 40 years ago, whereas the Indian army is really battle hardened. Do you think that will give us a real edge in case a war were to break out between the two countries?
Firstly, Mohan, I have learned one thing in the army. I must respect my adversary. I do not ever dilute his capability even in my mind. And I do not want the public ever to believe that your adversary is weak. See, to that extent, this is something which a lot of people in India, unfortunately, tend to get carried away by this. See, and the argument which you're making, nothing against it. It's absolutely pure logic and sense. And the deductions you're drawing are absolutely correct. But I look at it slightly differently. You see, just physical stamina, that kind of a thing in battle is not sufficient today. It's a combination of things. The capability to carry on fighting. How long can you carry on fighting? What is your sustainability? What is your logistics? What is the terrain on which you are fighting? China has got the huge advantage of the entire open plateau of Tibet in front and behind them. Their logistics, no problem. Look at our side. From eastern Ladakh. You see, people who have never had a look at these kind of things. One load carrier coming from Pathankot to Leh and going back takes 16 to 17 days. Sometime back, we had just one airfield, then we had two airfields. Today, we are going to have more airfields in Ladakh. Right? Our infrastructure. We have to cater for the entire civil population of Ladakh also in terms of the logistics dumping for the winter. Now, fortunately, things are opening up with the Zojila tunnel shortly going to be opened. The Atal tunnel on the other side is open. Movement on these roads. But can you imagine all these days? Our working season has been 6 months, and that's all about all. So there are huge constraints. And when a military commander starts looking at these things, he looks at every aspect. And in today's world, it's not difficult even to quantify this in computer models and come to your deductions to say, see, this is going to be a major issue. A victory cannot be just measured by the strength of the infantryman's foot. No. There are many, many more things which have to go in. If I was a Chinese commander today, I wouldn't even think of putting infantry soldiers on assaults in the high altitude and things like that. The Indians are past masters at that, right? They can take it on. I will look at missile warfare. I will look at rocketry. China has the thing called the second artillery, which is all missilery and rocketry. It is delivery of a huge amount of munitions on my head. If I am sitting as an Indian, I'm sitting in defense. I would be looking at that. So, depending on the kind of strategies that they adopt there, and the kind of defensive strategies and counter-offensive strategies that we adopt here, only that will tell as to who will be a victor in battle. But having said all this, I am totally confident of my troops, of my technologies, what I have, of my logistics capability. It took me just 60 days for India to build up 50,000 troops into Leh and into the areas of eastern Ladakh. And someone who's traveled into eastern Ladakh will be amazed to see the kind of deployment, the kind of infrastructure which has been built up by India in the last couple of years. It took us 2 months just to fly in those troops. We had no tanks earlier in eastern Ladakh. Today, we got tanks of flush in those areas. So, while we have all the capability and I've got all the confidence in our government, etc., I would not like to see war. A lot of people think that generals and people for my profession love to go to war For us, the ultimate thing is to see peace. It's always to see peace. My capability must deter the other side from fighting a war with me. That is the projection which I must make. My cognitive capability, my logistic capability, my operational capability put together must project to the other side that if he comes to war, he will inevitably lose.
Okay, amazing assessment. It's well, yeah, one wouldn't think while talking to a general that they would bat for peace rather than for war.
We would like to see
Correct.
our nation develop. Why put
Yeah,
all these resources into war fighting? These
yeah,
resources can educate so many people, can
sure.
feed so many more people. How wonderful it would be that new technologies come out of it, right?
Sure.
Instead of just wasting it by throwing rockets at each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I'm conscious that we are rapidly running out of time, but so I'll just have two questions for you. One is inevitably on Pakistan, and the other one is the recent role that you're playing. So, as far as Pakistan is concerned, is it fair to describe Pakistan as a snake in the backyard dancing to the tune of China?
Very good description, I must say, and I'm sure it must be playing. If I even mention that, it will play hugely on their overall demeanor, their psyche as such. Pakistan, unfortunately, is a nation. Nothing against the Pakistan people. The Pakistan people today are themselves fed up of their own army, their own system, so to say. They would love to find peace with India, live together in peace and harmony, have trade, ensure that they thrive in the shadow. I mean, it's not good to say shadow, but India is so much larger. The shadow will inevitably be cast that side. In an emerging economy, already almost $4 trillion, will go to $10 trillion in the future when Pakistan is still looking for its $2 billion and $3 billion loans. How much it can benefit? Today, if they want to trade, they have to come via Dubai. Why not trade via Wagah? Why not trade through Munabao in Rajasthan? You are not do it through Fazilka. And we got a common border. Let's thrive. Let's exchange things. Agricultural goods, cotton, power, human resources, huge amounts of things that can happen. Pakistan Army will not allow it. The importance of the Pakistan Army is based upon this whole Kashmir narrative, which is again, unfortunately, based on an ideological. That is the unfortunate thing, and I don't foresee things changing very easily in the near future. As far as the relationship with China is concerned, Pakistan provides China the force multiplication effect. If China is activating the northern border and simultaneously Pakistan doesn't go to war, but just threatens India along the western border, it is sufficient. We have to hold back so much of force. These are just holding actions that they do. We have got to keep a force intact all along here. There, if we are looking at a two-front war, both fronts need not be equally active. One front could be completely dead, but we have to maintain, we are compulsorily required to make sure that we have our defensive posture intact. So that's Pakistan's role in this, and it's a very important role with China. I don't foresee, as one of those I don't foresee war in the near future. But that doesn't offset our preparedness. Preparedness is the most important thing, even more than ultimately going to war. Because it's that preparedness which sends home the correct message. And of late, you would have seen lots and lots of talk shows, lots and lots of programs on YouTube. I participate on this almost every other day. Project the right message to pass. You are too small. You can't do much to India. You can try your tricks in Kashmir with a few things here and there. Now, India has gone past that stage. We are integrated Kashmir with the rest of India. The Article 370 doesn't send home a message to Kashmiris that they are different and they got to be treated with kid gloves and things like that. They are equally citizens of India. And therefore, there is no more talk on any issue concerning the integrity of Kashmir. This is the way we have to look at Pakistan. Only look at how can we improve this relationship in the future. India's intent was made clear in 2014 and 15. It is Pakistan which now has to take the next steps.
That's a very positive note. Now, my last question to you is the second avatar in your life, which is to play role in the peacetime operations within the country. Now, with the threat of climate change and so on, handling natural disasters is an extremely important step to safeguard our country. And Prime Minister Modi appointed you as the Secretary of the National Disaster Management Authority. You have already, served our country during COVID-19 disaster, as well as the rescue of workers from the tunnel recently in Uttarakhand and so on. So, could you please enlighten us your role in the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, and how it is related to the security aspect of India?
Ah, I'm glad you asked this question, and even in the end, if it is in the end. Firstly, I am just a member. I'm not the secretary at the moment of the National Disaster Management Authority, but we have four members, all who are equally, proficient in their job, and everything is done through a consensus approach. Mr. Modi himself is extremely proficient in this domain. A lot of people don't realize this, perhaps. The fact that he handled the Bhuj earthquake and single-handedly, virtually at that time, he handled the entire Bhuj earthquake, and it is his state that time in Gujarat where he enacted the State Disaster Management Act and even raised the State Disaster Management Authority and their State Disaster Response Force. So everything which was done in all the 35 other states later as a part of the National Disaster Management Act of 2005 had already been done by Mr. Modi. So he understands this fully, and he is as the Prime Minister, he is the chairman of the National Disaster Management Authority. There's no vice chairman. We work with him, under him, and under the PMO, alongside with the Ministry of Home Affairs, which has the department, the Department of Disaster Management is actually with the MHA. So we are an authority. The NDMA is a policy-making body, essentially. We've got the NDRF with us, the response force, 16 units, specialized response force goes in for specialized kind of operations. We have the National Institute of Disaster Management in Delhi, which is the cognitive side, the knowledge side of it, which keeps conducting seminars, courses, and things like that. This domain is a domain which was neglected in India for far too long. You see, everyone used to think that let the disaster happen and then we will respond to it. We'll send the army, we'll send the police, we'll distribute some rations, we'll put up a refugee or a camp for displaced people, etc. And that is good enough for disaster management. The 14,000 or I think 10,000 plus people who died in the Odisha cyclone, super cyclone, and then the 10,000 plus who died in the Bhuj earthquake, then the 12,000 plus who died in the tsunami. If you remember the Indian Ocean tsunami, all these were eye-openers. So why should we lose these lives at all? Why don't we prepare ourselves? So then the whole principle of preparedness started, and a whole new approach came. The cycle of disaster management is now preparedness, to include mitigation, include training as a part of it, include infusion of technology, right? Early warning. Then it goes, after if it happens, then you go to response. In response, it is relief. And then ultimately build back. And if not just build back, it is build back better than what you have. Now, this is the cycle which is being exercised in India. Mr. Modi in 2016 gave out a 10-point agenda on this, which has become a code, a mantra around the world. What most people are not aware is that during the G20 process, India gave such importance to disaster management. First of all, we didn't call it disaster management, we called it disaster risk resilience, right? DRR. That we raised the 13th vertical within the G20. We had 3 such meetings on which there was total consensus. And that is how the world started getting to know even more about the Indian role in disaster management around the world. We also set up under Mr. Modi's initiative in Glasgow, COP27. Remember the climate conference in Glasgow?
Yes.
We set up the CDRI, the Coalition for Disaster Risk Infrastructure, of which I think 39 or 40 nations have already joined in. Right. So lots and lots of initiatives from India have taken place at the NDMA level. And the NDMA is deeply involved in the development of better policies, better training, mitigation, preparedness. We've got the money from the 15th Finance Commission. We are already in sync with the 16th Finance Commission, which is giving us a huge chunk of money to make sure that all these mitigation measures are in place. You'll be happy to know the Odisha fatalities. A cyclone of equal magnitude in Gujarat called Biparjoy last year had 0 fatalities.
Mm-hmm.
We have developed the early warning capabilities. We've got the scientific things that attached to it. And now we take this to the schools, the colleges, and in terms of national security, the armed forces are coming back into the domain of disaster management today. So this is a huge thing which is happening in India. More and more people get involved in it because climate change is something which is hitting the whole world. It's a question of who takes the initiative and make sure that you mitigate the effects of climate change on your nation.
So basically, your contribution in this field shows that even during peacetime, army generals are useful. That's what it shows. And I think it really dovetails nicely with the Vishwamitra policy of the government of India, that we are the first responders to any natural disaster, not just within our territory, but also around our neighborhood and elsewhere in the world.
I may give a good reminder that when the earthquake took place in Turkey, India was the first to respond. We sent our 60 parafield hospital from Agra, and we sent the NDRF together, and they were the first to land in Turkey and carry out relief.
That's nice to know. So, what a fascinating discussion it has been, sir. You have been extremely generous, not only in your service to the country, but also in terms of sharing your thoughts, because this knowledge needs to be passed on to the subsequent generation, which you have done by participating in this documentary. Hopefully, we will have many more such discussions on different topics of importance, and we'll remain in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monsab. All the very best to you, and Jai Hind to our viewers.